So today we are going to talk about the classical period, right? And this is what has long been referred to as the classical period of history. We've got 600 BCE to 600 CE. These are not perfect lines in the sand, all right? Like, there was literally nothing that happened in the year 600 BCE or 600 CE that marks the turn of these periods. It's just lines that historians picked, all right? Roughly speaking, the reason they picked 600 BCE is because that's round about the time that we have the rise of like Taoism and Buddhism. Confucius is going to live around about that time. The rise of some important empires is going to be happening around that time. 600, all of those civilizations are going to have fallen by that time period. And don't feel the need to write all this stuff. I will share this out. Just kind of follow along and write the stuff that you don't feel like you're comfortable with. I don't want everybody to feel like that. Yeah, that's even too small. You can't even see it, especially way back in the back. So I'll share this out with you. No need to write it all. 600 CE, the classical empires have fallen, and we're right about up to the birth of what new universal religion coming in 622? Islam. Very good. Islam's going to be born. So we're going to run through, again, the key concepts. This is the stuff that the College Board says your questions will be coming from on the AP exam. Now, there's, of course, going to be some more detail that the AP exam is going to deal with, and we can talk about in less than 1 hour here. But some of the language that I'm going to use today is the exact language from the College Board, and it will appear in actual multiple choice questions. They repeat some of this language. So it's a good thing to follow along. So we're going to start with 2.1. And this is the codification of religions. The idea that religious and ideological beliefs are going to grow and change and transform the societies in which they live in, right? And we're going to run through a number of them. The first and foremost is arguably one of the most important in world history, because it is the development of this religion that is ultimately going to not only spur itself into existence, but later Christianity and Islam, and that's the Jewish monotheistic faith. Okay, so now this predates the classical period. Who would we give as like the founder of the Jewish faith? Abraham. Very good. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, these are all religions of the God of Abraham. Abraham is considered the patriarch or the father of all these religions. And he lived about 4,000 years before the Common Era. So why are we talking about Judaism in this period? This is when it gets codified. This is when it gets like really written down. So for those of you that are Jewish or Christian, and you might look at the Bible, the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, or the Torah and the Jewish Bible, when this is being written down originally, these oldest books, during this era, in around about the 6th century BCE. So it's going to be codified. Remember last week we mentioned Hammurabi's Code, right? Code, C-O-D-E. Codification. That means to write down what our rules are, or to write down this religion, what it is. So to codify something is to put it into law, to put it in the books. And really, what is much of the first 5 books of the Bible? It's really Jewish law. It's like the origins of the Jewish faith. It's the origins of the Jewish patriarchs and prophets. But then there's a couple whole books that are spent just giving hundreds of laws that Jews are to follow, including the big 10 commandments that you guys are probably familiar with. Judaism is a monotheistic religion. It is a one-God religion. And it is a one-God religion existing in a world in which there were many God religions, polytheistic religions, whereas Judaism is just going to recognize this one. The Hebrew Scriptures, those first 5 books, the Torah, and then later books that are going to be written, will be codified during this period. All right? This codification of Jewish law is really important. And by the same notion today, the Christian faith is obviously written down. The Islamic faith has a book, the Quran, that is written down. These are the fact that these holy books are written down makes them portable. People, the believers, can take them wherever they go. And this is going to be a contributing factor to the idea that Christianity and Islam and Judaism are going to travel very far from their points of origin. All right? Judaism is born in the Middle East, and today there are Jews in countries around the world. Christianity later is going to be born in the Middle East, and today there are Christians on every continent of the planet. I'm sure there's like Christian scientists on, I shouldn't say Christian scientists because that's actually a separate religion. There are scientists that are Christian on Antarctica right now, I would have to imagine. Islam exists on every continent of the planet. It's very much portable. You don't necessarily have to be in Mecca or Medina or Jerusalem or some important holy city of Islam to be a Muslim. It goes anywhere. The Jewish people are a relatively small number. Okay? We're going to talk about religions today, some that are universal, religions that are like open to anybody, and some others that are like more ethnic based or more like close knit. Judaism is, I think, the latter of those two. One is Jewish if their mother is Jewish. It's kind of interesting. In a patriarchal society, like which the world is after the agricultural revolution, let's use the word, instead of agricultural revolution, let's use the word Neolithic revolution instead, because we're going to sound smarter when we say that. In a world where the world is a stark patriarchal society, Judaism is a matrilineal religion, which means you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish. All right? And it's much more rare for people to convert, even to this day, to convert to Judaism. Whereas Christianity and Islam, Buddhism, these don't have any ethnic connections to them whatsoever. Anybody can be Muslim today. Anybody could be Christian today. Those are what we call universal religions. They're open to anybody that would like to be there. Whereas some other religions are a little bit more closed off, a little bit more tied to ethnicity. The Jewish people in the 1st century BCE, actually let's go in order. The Jewish people in the 6th century BCE. Correct me if I'm wrong. When I'm reading documents or whatnot, or reading history, whenever I come across the phrase 6th century, I have to do this little translation in my head and say to myself, 500s BCE. Or if I'm in the 6th century of the Common Era, I have to say 500s. That's what I do. Do you guys do that too? It helps me along to straighten out those years. It is really important to do as we get more to the modern era. When you start seeing 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century pop up much more, you want to make sure you don't get tripped up. Because if you're on your AP exam and you're supposed to be writing about the 19th century and you're writing about the 1900s, you're going to not do very well. All right? So make sure you translate those years in your head. The Jewish people in the 6th century BCE are going to go through a major and traumatic event known as the Babylonian Captivity. The Jewish community, the city of Jerusalem, is conquered by a group of people known as the Neo-Babylonians or the Chaldeans. And many of the Jewish leadership, the priests and the upper echelon of Jewish society, are taken prisoner into the city of Babylon. And it is there where their religion will be codified. The priests will start writing this stuff down. They're removed from their holy temple in Jerusalem, and they begin to take this religion on the road. They're kind of forced to, right? This is the first, what we would call, Jewish diaspora. That word diaspora pops up in AP World History a couple times. A diaspora, or a diasporic event, is a spreading out. A spreading out of people, a dispersion of people. In AP World, we usually hear about the Jewish diaspora and then the African diaspora of the Atlantic slave trade. All right? So the first one is going to be in the 6th century, in the 500s BCE. Many of the Jews are taken to Babylon, and they live within the Babylonian captivity for about 50 years. They live there until the Persians come in and conquer the Neo-Babylonians. And this is just a part of the story of Mesopotamia, where you're going to have one civilization after another, starting back pre-Babylonian era, Sumerians and whatnot, all the way up through the Persians. One civilization conquering another, because they live in a part of the world where there's not a lot of easily defensible borders. All right? Unlike, England doesn't get conquered very much, because it's an island, right? Or even Egypt doesn't get conquered quite as much because they've got a lot of good natural borders, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Sahara Desert. But in Mesopotamia, there's a lot of conquering going on, right? So the Persians come in, and King Cyrus the Great comes in, and he sees all these Jews in captivity, and he says, hey, you guys can go home now if you want. And many Jews go back home to Jerusalem. Some stay, some hang out and live in Babylon and eventually modern Iraq, 2,000 years later. But many leave, 2,500 years later. Many leave and go back to Jerusalem. And Cyrus lets them build their their temple again. All right, this Temple of Solomon, the most important place of worship for the Jews. They get to rebuild it. And this is an important note about how the Persians under Cyrus would rule their empire. In that where they would let local people do what they want to do. So if you're Jewish and you want to pray to your one Jewish God, cool on you. What religion do you think Cyrus the Great is? He's Persian. He's a Zoroastrian, right? But he doesn't care. He doesn't care if the Jews want to be Jews. They can do their thing. Right? And so this is a good way to rule what I call a massive multi-ethnic empire. Like, you can let local people do what they want to do. The Romans are going to do this over time. We talked in our class today, we mentioned the Ottoman Empire is going to do this for a time. Let local people kind of do their own thing. Let them be, as long as they pay taxes and keep the peace. Eventually, by 70 CE, the Jews are going to have another diasporic event. Now, in 70 CE, the Romans have conquered the Jewish homeland, okay? And they're kind of ruling or overseeing the Jewish homeland. They let the Jews run a lot of local issues. The Jews have their own local leadership, but the Romans really oversee it all. And by 70 CE, after dealing with a series of riots and protests from Jewish populations who want more freedom, the Romans ultimately kick them out. They say, all right, you guys aren't playing along very well with the Roman Empire rules, so we're kicking you out. And after this second diasporic event, Jews are going to spread throughout the Middle East, some even up as far into Eastern Europe. Some are going to spread across North Africa. This is important, this second spreading out of the Jews, because now some of those Jews that leave their homeland of Israel are going to go into a place like Arabia. And they're going to live in towns in Arabia. And 600 years later, 550 years later, a guy like Muhammad, as he's traveling throughout Arabia, is going to come in contact with Jews in Arabia. And that is going to have some shaping. So his knowledge of Judaism is going to have some shaping of the ultimate religion that is born in the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century. Okay? So it's really important as a world history event that these Jews spread out throughout the world. Another religion we need to know is the religion of South Asia. Born out of the Vedic religious beliefs that we talked about last week, and this is going to be Hinduism. Hinduism believes in, it's kind of an odd notion that because many people believe that Hinduism is like a polytheistic God, like there's many gods. What there really is many manifestations of one like eternal being, one like universal being. So there could be millions and millions of manifestations of this one entity. Now, if you have a religion that has millions and millions of different manifestations of an eternal being, and even different households and certainly different communities might have important gods that they would look to, it's going to create a lot of division within the society, right? There's going to be a lot of unique aspects to this Hinduism religion in South Asia. It's going to make it very hard to unite in a strong, centralized government where everybody's kind of following the same ideas if everybody's got a unique interpretation of this faith. And that's what we're going to see in South Asia with this religion that develops into Hinduism. Hinduism, of course, is going to teach this notion of reincarnation to ultimately rise through different stages of life to where we can eventually escape the earthly world and join Brahma, join this like universal spirit around the world, or outside of the world, I should say. This is done through following your obligations in your life. Whether you are living at the highest level of society and you are a member of the priestly class, or caste, I should use the language, or you are like at the lowest servant level of the society. Everybody's got a role to fill. Everybody's got an obligation to fill. And you fulfill your obligation, you fulfill your dharma, your responsibilities to your caste, you will get good karma, and you'll rise to the next level in a next life. And then a next life, and then in the next life. Everybody's got to fill their obligations. This is hugely important for Indian society. It is going to create one of the most rigid social structures in world history, all right? Where you are born into your caste, you live in your caste, you will die in your caste. In your next life, you might be in a subsequent caste. Or if you don't fulfill your obligations, what could you do? Might go the other way, right? So you've got these obligations that you must follow. Well, remember, almost throughout the entire year, we've been kind of alluding to one of the problems that an empire like China is going to face is near constant peasant uprisings, peasant protests. The poor people, frustrated with their condition, maybe taxes are too high, or they're pushing on us too much, and eventually the peasants have had enough and they rise up and they protest. Guess what you're not seeing nearly as much of in India? Uprisings of the lower castes, right? Peasant protests nearly as much. It's going to happen. You don't want to talk in absolutes. It's going to happen, but it's not nearly as big of an issue. Because when it's tied to your religion, and you believe that as much as it sucks, we've got to do these things that we've got to do to rise to the next level. We read at the beginning of the year in my class, we read that story of Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna and Krishna, the warrior who didn't want to go to battle against his family, but Krishna, God, was like, dude, it's your obligation. You have to. And he's like, oh man, but this really sucks. You have to. Okay, I'll do it. And so that teaches everybody in India to follow your role, follow your obligation. Another thing we don't see nearly as much in India is slave populations. All right? Whereas a society like the Romans, for example, that take a lot of their people and send them out to war to expand the Roman Empire, and they fill in the labor gaps back home with slaves, India has built into it a warrior class, a labor class, a servant class. So they don't have slavery nearly as much in India as they are going to in other parts of the world. Coolio? Coolio. All right. Let's press on. Buddhism, another faith that we need to mention very briefly here. Buddhism is born in the 6th century BCE, again in India. Connection between Buddhism and India. Just like Christianity, we can say, is kind of born out of Judaism, Buddhism is born out of Hinduism. The first Buddha, and note, Buddha is not a god in Buddhism. The Buddha is a human being who has achieved enlightenment. There was an original Buddha, that was Siddhartha Gautama, but there could be other Buddhas. There have been other Buddhas, people that have achieved enlightenment. And what does it mean to achieve enlightenment? You have escaped the suffering of the human world because you stopped wanting stuff. You stopped desiring all the stuff that we always want and desire, right? You've gotten past that. So you're not bummed out about anything anymore. Right? You've escaped the suffering of this world. And that's really the main idea of Buddhism. Yes, ma'am? There's kind of the same idea as Hinduism. There's like this universal spirit outside of this earth. It's not a god in the sense of a Christian god or a Jewish god or anything like that. Buddhism is born out of Hinduism. Siddhartha Gautama is a Hindu prince who is very frustrated with ideas like the caste system that has developed in India. Why does he have so much and some other people have so little, yet he's still not happy, right? Like, I don't know, you guys watch Keeping Up the Kardashians, right? I don't know why. Do people still watch this? Is this still a thing? No? It was like 2000 late? Okay, whatever. But anyway, these are wealthy people, and every time my wife stops on it, they're usually moaning about something, right? They're like really rich people, which is incredible. Like, if I were to be able to find a way to be really wealthy, but have no marketable skills whatsoever, that would be an incredible thing, and I would thank my lucky stars every day, right? But they're not. They seem to be whinging all the time about something. And that's what Siddhartha Gautama was like, dude, I'm totally rich, and I'm not happy. And that's when he meditates and he eventually realizes that the reason he's not happy is because no matter what, we always seem to want more stuff. right? We always desire more. And so he meditates, and eventually, after like almost wasting away to nothing and casting away all his earthly possessions, and that's why we will always see pictures or statues of the Buddha with the droopy earlobes, because he had big earrings, like you know how the kids do these days, where they put those things in their ears and the discs get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I walk by and I go, ugh. And other people walk by and they're like, awesome. There's a disconnect there between my generation and yours, I think. But anyway, you could say, dude, I'm just rocking it like Siddhartha Gautama used to rock it, right? And he had earrings like that, and he cast them away, and now he's got these big droopy earrings because he's not wearing any jewels or adornments anymore, right? So Buddhism is born in India. It never will replace Hinduism in India. Some in India will convert to Buddhism, to be sure, but it will never replace Hinduism in India. In fact, when Ashoka, the grandson of the founder of the Mauryan dynasty, when Ashoka, the emperor, converts to Buddhism himself, he doesn't make everybody else in India convert to Buddhism. Why would you do that? Because what does Hinduism do for India? It gives it social structure. It keeps the peace. It keeps the poor and the peasants, which is the majority of the population, it keeps them chilled out, right? So he's not going to totally rock the boat. Now, he does go around India, and he has what are called the rock and pillar edicts of Ashoka, like carvings on rocks, carvings on tall pillars, that people can walk by and read some kind of cool sayings of Buddhism, like, hey, be a good guy, don't desire things, or whatever. He's going to go around and spread those messages, but he's not pushing to destroy the Hindu system. We will see the same thing much later, when the Mughal Empire rules India. Right? Or even before, when the Delhi Sultanate controls northern India. These are Muslim states. Are they going to try to force conversion of all the Hindus? No. Because Hinduism really keeps a lot of order in that society. All right? There is one Mughal emperor, a guy named Aurangzeb, who gets pretty harsh on Hindus, but he doesn't last very long. Anyway, we press on. Oh, one note. Buddhism supports missionary activity. The idea of sending Buddhists out to try to bring other Buddhists into the fold, or other people into the faith. All right? Ashoka will do this. He is going to give funding to Buddhist missionaries to leave India and spread Buddhism into China and other parts of Southeast Asia. And so this is going to be funded by Ashoka outside of India, though. And what we're going to see is when Buddhism makes its way into places like China, it's going to blend with Chinese culture. What do we call it when these two cultural ideas are going to blend together and create something new? Syncretism, very good. And we will see like new branches of Buddhism develop that kind of mix with Chinese culture. Speaking of Chinese culture, Confucius is going to live at about the same time as Siddhartha Gautama in India. Confucius is Chinese. He's living during the Zhou dynasty of China. I will write that on the board for you. The Zhou, Z-H-O-U, dynasty of China. The Zhou dynasty is a very decentralized Chinese state. It's not a lot of central order. Confucius is looking at this and he's like, we can do better. And he starts teaching. He comes up with a lot of ideas how to make a better Chinese state, right? And eventually he's got students and they follow him and they write his stuff down and they start teaching him. Now nothing really happens with this for about 400 years after Confucius lived. They're just ideas. But those ideas will eventually be adopted by what Chinese dynasty? No. I'm writing it, but no. I just want you to know that Qin is in between. Eventually, the Han Dynasty will adopt Confucian ideas for its own governmental rule. The Qin Dynasty, the reason that they're so important, we'll talk about them more in a moment, the Qin Dynasty is the one that unifies China. They conquer the state of Zhou and other rival states. This is during what's known as the Warring State period of China. And they will unify China. But actually, Qin Shi Huangdi, the emperor of the Qin Dynasty, hates Confucius. Because Confucius talks about like how the emperor should be a good guy, should be a benevolent, good man, right? Qin Shi Huangdi wasn't about that. Qin Shi Huangdi was a harsh ruler. He ruled very, very, very harshly on his people. And he only lasts for about 12 years, all right? But the Han Dynasty, they adopt Confucianism. Confucianism stresses social harmony in China. Confucianism stresses social harmony. promoted by rituals in society, like there's a right way to do everything, and we should follow the proper rituals, and relationships. So if you hear rituals, or you see on a question, rituals and relationships in China, you gotta think Confucianism. The relationships of Confucius, there's 5 of them. Ruler to ruled. The ruler has obligations to his people. The people have obligations to their ruler. Father to son. The father has obligations to his son. The son has obligations to his father. Elder brother to younger brother. Same story. Husband to wife. That's making sure the wife is mentioned, but she's subservient to that husband. It's a patriarchal society. And then friend to friend. And if everybody meets their obligations within these relationships, China will be good. If people don't meet those obligations, things start to go bad. All right? Taoism. A guy named Lao Tzu. You will either see Lao Tzu or Lao Tzu. Same guy. Just transliteration issues. Lao Tzu in China lives about the same time as Confucius. He gives birth to what is known as the Taoist faith. Taoism is stressing harmony in nature, a balance between people and the natural world. Thanks, guys. A balance between people and the natural world. What is most important for the AP exam for you guys? If you care about the government and how government should run in China, are you going to be a Taoist or are you going to be a Confucianist? Confucianist. If you care about your place on this world or in the universe or your balance with nature, you care about Taoism. Taoism is your thing. All right? So Taoists don't get involved in the government. Okay? Taoists stay out of the government. They're apolitical. Christianity. We already mentioned briefly, but Christianity, it draws on Jewish tradition. Jesus Christ was born to a Jewish family. Christians believe that Jesus Christ is the prophesied Messiah. That a Messiah would come to this earth, a God would come to this earth. And those Jews that believed that Jesus was that Messiah that was prophesied, they become Christians. Today, there are millions of Jews on the planet that don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They just believe he was a guy, and they're still Jews today. All right? Christianity believes it's a one God faith, but just like Hinduism has many manifestations of this universal entity, Christianity has 3 manifestations of their God. The Father, God the Son, Jesus, and then God the Holy Spirit. That kind of encompasses all. This is born, obviously, in what is today Israel, but it's going to relatively quickly spread throughout many parts of the Roman Empire. And eventually, by the 300s, in the 4th century BCE, a Roman emperor named Constantine will adopt Christianity as his own religion, and then it spreads much more rapidly through the Roman Empire. By about the year 1000 CE, Christianity will spread all the way to Northern Europe. The Vikings will adopt Christianity by that point. College Board also wants you to recognize what's known as Greco-Roman religion and philosophy. The religion of the Greeks, the religion of the Romans. This is what we kind of refer to in the West today as Greek mythology or Roman mythology. And these are polytheistic beliefs where the gods kind of mess around with human beings and control the natural world around us. That's the Greek religion. That's the Roman religion. For some Greeks and Romans, this was a serious religious belief. For others, they were just kind of like stories that people would tell. All right, that was kind of made for a common culture. There's also the philosophical idea. The word philosophy means a love of wisdom. And so the Greek world is going to give us great philosophers, guys that thought about how the natural world worked and also thought about the interaction between people within this world. So thinkers like Socrates and Plato should recognize those names. And they would use things like logic to offer perspectives and understanding on the natural world. Socrates would famously say that anything could be understood through questioning. And that's why we might do things like Socratic circles or a Socratic method, where you try to find truth through questions. All right? With these religions, we're going to see the changes in social structures. We've already run through the 5 relationships of Confucianism, but I do want to note the phrase filial piety. Please recognize and associate filial piety with Confucius. Filial piety is a respect for one's elders, especially which elder? In Confucianism, yeah. Your father. Yeah, you can just say it. You don't have to raise hands. Especially your father. So the idea of filial piety is a respect, a reverence for one's elders. All right? I like to point this out. Please recognize in like the United States, American culture, we have an American culture that is built on the idea that it doesn't matter who your father is. Right? Your father can be successful, your father may not be successful, he can be good, he can not be so good, and that doesn't really have all that much bearing on who you are. We're all supposed to be individuals, and we pave our own way. In fact, many of you guys can't wait for the day that you graduate from high school because you're going to get the heck away from your families, right? Or maybe not. I don't know, maybe you want to stay forever. Michigan needs you, so stay. Whereas in China, it absolutely matters who your father is. Right? It absolutely, your father should be respected and revered. Chinese cultures, historically, practice ancestor veneration. The idea that, like, your ancestors are still, like, playing an important part of your spiritual life. We don't have that notion in the West, and that makes a stark difference between the two. Christianity and Buddhism are going to be 2 religions that support a monastic tradition. That means monasteries are going to be built, and they're going to be filled up with monks. Buddhist monks, Christian monks. These are guys that are going to separate from their society to live, either in Christianity, a life like Jesus Christ, or to live a life of Buddhist contemplation and working to achieve enlightenment. All right? Why does this have an impact on like gender and social structures? Because these are typically men who are going to be leaving their families behind to take these monastic orders. All right? This is not like widespread. There's never like majorities of populations that do it or anything, but it does exist within Buddhism and in Christianity. Buddhism and Christianity are also missionary faiths. I already mentioned this. They encourage missionaries to go out and spread the faith. Yes, ma'am. For those families where women might be left more in control, it could, but certainly not in society as a whole. There's still going to be starkly patriarchal societies. But it could have impact like within households. There are other religions out there. We have not covered every base of religions. Shamanism, where there might be a spiritual man within society that can connect you to the spirits of the world. Shamanism. We often see this in like pastoral societies. This would be the kind of religion that the Mongols would have practiced in the 1300s. Animism, where you see spirits in nature all around you. Animism. And then, of course, ancestor veneration. Here's where I encourage my students to, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch that movie Coco. It is probably one of the best Pixar movies that I've seen. It made me laugh. It made me cry. But Coco is a great example of a syncretic religion because what religion are the people in Coco? They're in Mexico. What religion are they? Well, Mexican is their ethnicity. They're Christian. Specifically, what kind of Christian? They're Catholic. Spain is a Catholic country. They spread Catholicism, right? But Catholicism in Mexico is different from the Catholicism in Sterling Heights, Michigan, or Catholicism in Spain even. Because we don't have a Day of the Dead in Michigan. We don't practice this. And in Spain, they don't have a Day of the Dead. That's a Mexican thing. And what is it doing? It's a syncretic idea where Ancestor veneration that would have been practiced in Mesoamerican religions is kind of blending with Roman Catholicism. And so there's this notion that there's this day where you can kind of connect with your dead ancestors. So that's a great example of syncretism. So ancestor veneration exists in many parts of the world, and it'll coexist with some of these universal religions. All right, you need to know a handful of these early states. I'm going to show you a map in a second. But I just want you to hear the names first before we look at them on a map. Because there's a couple of these that you might be less familiar with, but they are on the AP curriculum, so you should know. In Southwest Asia, that in and of itself is a weird phrase for most of us. We typically call it the Middle East, but you need to know you never eat soggy waffles. So if we're talking about Southwest Asia, we're talking about Southwest Asia, the Middle East, all right? And that's going to be the Persian Empire, the biggest empire of Southwest Asia. Persia today is where Iran is. East Asia, Qin dynasty in China, the Han dynasty in China. South Asia is India. So we've got the Mauryan and Gupta dynasties. The Mediterranean, there's a number of them here. Phoenician city-states, I mentioned them last week. The Phoenicians are the ones that developed this alphabet that we still kind of connect to today, where they made an alphabet based on symbols that represented sounds rather than symbols that represent things. All right? But then Greek city-states, the Hellenistic Empire. This is the empire that who creates? Who builds the Hellenistic Empire? Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great. Very good. And then, of course, the Roman Empire. In Mesoamerica, the city of Teotihuacan, the city-state of Teotihuacan, it's going to be the biggest city in Mesoamerica in this classical period. And then the development of Mayan city-states in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. If you've ever been to Cancun, you're not very far from Mayan ruins, so you might have thought of that. In the Andes Mountains, this long predates the Inca. There was a civilization known as the Moche, M-O-C-H-E. And then in North America, you had Chaco and Cahokia. Cahokia would be like kind of present-day Indiana and Kentucky and stuff. So just know that there were civilizations in all of these places. You're probably not going to go into much depth on any of these on the AP exam, but just know of their existence. And we can take a really quick look at a map here. Not a hot map, but I don't even include the Americas, or the Americas aren't even included on this map. Once again, thanks to the wonderful Freemanpedia that puts together all this stuff. Obviously, there's East Asia, South Asia. Notice, what do you notice about the Mauryan and the Gupta dynasties? They don't even cover all of India, right? They're not nearly as big as we're going to see later civilizations get. The Persian Empire is very big. I want you to, with the Persians, recognize one name, and that is the Achaemenid. I will spell it for you. A-C-H-E-M-E-N-I-D. I think it's A-E-N-I-D. Achaemenid dynasty. This is the dynasty of Cyrus the Great. So if you know Cyrus and Darius and Xerxes, these are the Persians that we really come in most contact with. They're the Persians that let the Jews go back to Jerusalem. They're the Persians that eventually go to war with the Greeks in the Persian Wars. The Roman Empire, obviously, outlined in black here. And then the Hellenistic Empire of Alexander the Great. Almost, he conquers Persia. We'll deal with that in a second. All right, so we're going to deal with new states that grow during this classical period. Not going to get into a lot of weeds of the details of individual states, but what do all of the states have in common? They're going to create more centralized governments, where a central authority, oftentimes an emperor, will be ruling the state and creating the laws for society. They're going to create legal systems. The Romans had what were known as the 12 tables. Mesopotamian states kind of built on and expanded on early law codes all the way going back to something like Hammurabi's Code. They're going to create bureaucracies. And these are where your state might get so large, you have to appoint government officials that will carry out the will of the state. States will promote trade. That's how they bring a lot of money in. States will promote trade. They all do it. They issue currency. They might mint coins, and they put the emperor's face on that coin. They build roads. Roads are a way to promote trade. And guys, you don't have to know, like, the name of any road. The Persians had a road known as the Royal Road, right? But you don't have to know the name of any roads. You don't have to know I-75 goes from Michigan to Florida. All you have to say on your AP exam is both China and the Persian Empire developed roads throughout their empire that would facilitate trade. Boom, evidence point for you. Okay? It's not that hard. They all build roads. Which civilizations build roads? All of them. All right? They build roads. They also project their military power. They grow armies and they use those militaries. Sometimes they use it to expand their borders, to conquer neighboring states that they're more powerful than. They develop supply lines so they can move resources to their borders to support those expanding armies. They build defensive walls. What is the most famous defensive wall that you guys know of? The Great Wall of China. It's just a defensive wall built originally by the Qin dynasty, but added on by every dynasty in Chinese history. And they will have to grow militaries very large. Oftentimes, like for example, the Romans would even use conquered people within their military. They would kind of like force people to serve within their militaries. Sometimes pay people, pay mercenaries to serve within their militaries. So the militaries are going to grow much larger than they ever had in prior civilizations. All of these civilizations are going to have important imperial cities, like capital cities, for example, that serve as centers of government and centers of trade, centers of religious worship. You should recognize a few of them. Persepolis was a capital city of the Persian Empire. Chang'an, a capital of the Han Dynasty, Chang'an. A city like Athens, an important cosmopolitan trading city in the Mediterranean. Constantinople, the Eastern Roman capital, and eventually the capital of the what empire after the fall of Western Rome? Byzantine Empire. And Teotihuacan, we already mentioned, in the Americas. We're going to see in all of these civilizations the development of social classes and social hierarchies. They're going to be a little different depending on where you're at, but they're all going to be caste systems or strata within societies, levels within society that people fit. Farmers, laborers, cultivators, you might want to call them, peasants, slaves in many civilizations, not all. Artisans, merchants. That's really important to note. A society like the Greeks or the Romans that deals a lot in trade, merchants are going to have pretty high status. A society like China that doesn't have to deal as much with foreign trade because they have so much within, merchants have quite a low status. In fact, in China, they're typically referred to as the mean people. Confucius kind of puts them at a low status because they just raise prices on things. You're going to have elites within society, or what we call the aristocracy, the wealthy. And then, of course, India will have its caste system that segregates society. Throughout the classical period, gender relations will be shaped by patriarchies. They will all be patriarchal societies. Some will be more patriarchal than others. I would argue that China is probably the most patriarchal society that we'll deal with. But they'll all be male-dominated. In the classical period, we see far more trans-regional trade going across regions. There are 4 trade routes that developed during this period. And we're going to ride these 4 trade routes all the way until the modern day. In fact, I just read an article the other day about how China is building some like super high-speed rail across its northern border, and it's creating essentially a new Silk Road, they're referring to it as. So the 4 trade routes that you need to be familiar with. Silk Roads, stretching from China all the way across to the eastern Mediterranean. Trans-Saharan caravan routes, connecting sub-Saharan Africa with North Africa and the Middle East. Indian Ocean sea lanes. Indian Ocean sea lanes, connecting East Africa, the Middle East, Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. And then the Mediterranean Sea. You should know a good or two that is traded on each of these trade routes. Let's do them really quick. Silk Road. Silk. Okay, we've got to give me something else besides silk now. Porcelain. Very good. What about Indian Ocean sea lanes? Spices. Very good. What about Trans-Saharan network? Gold and salt. Okay, and eventually more of a slave trade. And then Mediterranean. Olives, olive oil, wine, cotton. Very good. All these things are good. New technologies will be developed that facilitate a lot of this trade. Camel saddles to help those camels riding in caravans across the Trans-Saharan network carry more product. A yoke, which is like that thing that you put over your oxen so they can pull big heavy wagons, maybe across the Silk Road. All right? So new technologies will be developed to help facilitate trade. Maritime technologies and understandings of monsoon wind patterns on the Indian Ocean trade network. The Lateen Sail. The Lateen Sail. Lateen, L-T-E-E-N. These are those triangular sails originally used in the Indian Ocean and in the Eastern Mediterranean. And they allowed sailors to tack against the wind. So you don't always have to have the wind at your back to go forward. So new technologies are going to help facilitate trade. And as people are moving, as people are trading, as empires are expanding, there's going to be some consequences from all this movement. Some of the consequences are good. We're going to spread crops to different parts of the world. We don't want to talk in this period about the Columbian Exchange because that's not going to come till much later. But we will spread rice varieties, something like a champa rice, from Vietnam further north into China. Or rice moving from South Asia into the Middle East. And these new crops, you guys know, rice requires a lot of water, right, to grow. So that's going to require a lot of intensive irrigation. So we're going to have some new irrigation techniques. And I like to talk about the qanat system. The qanat comes from an Arabic word that means channel. And this is the digging into a mountainside where there might be groundwater underneath to divert that water out for irrigation purposes. But as civilizations grow, as populations grow, and as they connect more through trade and conflict, diseases are going to spread. And as cities grow bigger, we're going to see more disease spread within urban areas. And so outbreaks of diseases like smallpox, for example, will devastate Chinese cities in the Han Dynasty. Rome will also have terrible smallpox outbreaks. Food will spread. Diseases are going to spread. Religions, of course, are also going to spread. As people trade more, do more business with each other, religious ideas are going to move from civilization to civilization. Not long after the birth of Buddhism in India, after it spreads into China, there will be far more Buddhists in China than there will be in India, where it was originally born. That is that. Anybody have any questions? Anything period 2 kind of stuff that you feel foggy about, that you're not 100% sure of? Questions that you might want to throw out for a couple more minutes here? Or we will call it a day. That is literally all there is on the AP curriculum. Not necessarily all you need to know, because there's always more details that you can fit in. But there's nothing more on the key concepts that is going to surprise you. So if you're comfortable with all those things, you're good.